with a lot of pleasure that we have Daniel Assisi with us today. He, as I said, is one of the most wonderful beings that I have met here in the States. His work in the spirits has been really remarkable. I mean, going from translating never-ending presentations from Divaldo Franco to writing a book where he talks about his own journey, similar to Paulo de Tarso to Damascus, his reflection, self-reflection, and the findings of growth as an eternal spirit. Dan lives in San Diego, California, with his family. He, as I mentioned before on my notes, he ended up kind of writing this book, The Road to Damascus, and winning several awards. He's a speaker. Many of you have met him before in different lectures and meetings. He has been speaking in more than 60 countries so far. He has a very unique sense of humor that we always have the feeling, the warmth of his heart kind of coming to us. And I feel like always hugging him because he's just wonderful. Besides that, he is a doctor in education, and lately, because he doesn't do enough, he decided to take another turn on his career and become a coach. So I think that we can tell him that the breadth and depth of his coaching right now is both the material, the realm, but also the spiritual realm. So it's with really a light in my heart that I welcome you, Dan, to our group today.
Thank you. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation and for spending some time with me on a Saturday where I know you guys could be doing something else. Yeah. And I'm really glad to see you too, Anna. You know, it's been a while since we saw each other in person. We were just chatting before you guys came. We also had a chance to at times, meet each other in different events, including one in Portugal. Yeah. I don't even know how many years ago, because then we're going to just feel like we're getting old. But it's always great to see you.
Yeah. So this meeting is being recorded and it's going to be published on YouTube. So if you ever want to listen to it again or forward to someone, it will be available later at our YouTube channel. Also, Dan will be talking for about 1 hour and then we'll be opening for questions. So I invite everyone to write down your thoughts and if you want to bring anything to his attention. So at this time, let's start with our prayer, calming our hearts, taking a deep breath, thanking the spiritual beings for this opportunity of being here together. We know that our friendships go beyond time and space. We are grateful for having our dear friend this morning, sharing his experience and knowledge with us. Him who always brings so much wisdom in a very humble way. We thank all the celestial spirits that support us on Chico Xavier, our dear group here in Portland, Oregon, a small group with a big heart. May this lecture help each one of us. May this lecture this morning fill our hearts and our homes with blessings of discovery and enlightenment. Dear Jesus, we ask you to this time give a big hug to Dan, who is a big partner of yours, thanking him for all his work and inspiring him on the conversation this morning. Thank you. The floor is all yours, my dear friend.
Thank you. Thank you for those very kind words, Anna, which I'm working towards being worth of, because the truth is we're all in this wonderful journey together of life, trying to make sense of things. Mm-hmm. And I think that in this past 2 or 3 years, we have all felt that. We have all felt that the world sometimes could feel like it's upside down, that things don't make sense anymore. And I think we all are searching for purpose and meaning in many different ways, right? And so I figured I would do something slightly different today with you guys, which is really just have a conversation, not so much about the book itself, but about the idea behind the book. I really like the symbolism of our road to Damascus in general. And so I want to kind of spend some time talking about that. And I very much welcome your questions, your participations, whatever it is that you feel like you want to add. Please don't feel like this is a formal presentation, or even for that matter, a pitch, right? About whether you should buy or read the book or listen to the audiobook or whatever it is. I just really think that it's an interesting topic. Of course, I am biased. And so I figured it would be a great time for us to have a conversation about it, if that's okay with you. So if that makes sense, let me know. And we can also course correct along the way, right? If you feel like you really want to hear more about specific pieces or bits about the book, or dive deeper or double click on a specific idea, let's just do it. Right? This is what we have time to do, right? This is why we're here together, to have a conversation. And I hope that works for you. And if it doesn't, let me know. We can course correct too. So I want to do a little pulse check and see if that makes sense for you, if that's a good plan for you for today.
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. All right. Thank you, Tabitha. I also see some thumbs up there. So, all right. So we can do a little bit of a backwards journey of sorts, right? So I think that the somewhat elephant in the room is, there is this book, right? This book that I've written called Our Road to Damascus. And I'm really happy to see that some folks have really liked it. There's some awards that it has won, and I am particularly proud of one review by Kirkus Reviews, who says that that's the book that succeeds in the tricky feat of being intriguingly spiritual without being explicitly religious. And if you know me, I think that will make sense, because I really do feel that at the end of it all, it's really not about labels. It's really not about groups or faiths or sometimes called organized religion, right? I think that there is a distinction in my mind, at least, about between religion and organized religion. And I say that because I see religion being your personal connection with the divine. It's a one-on-one relationship. It's an individual sport. And I see organized religion as our group, as a grupo, like, our group's attempt to make sense of what we deal with. And whenever that happens, things get slightly different, right? Because as we come to a group, we start creating rules. And sometimes those rules may or may not reflect our own personal ideas about the connection with the divine, or with God. So what I tried to do in the book was to get this wonderful story of Paul of Tarsus, encounter with Jesus, this incredible spirit that we know, and on his way to Damascus to go and capture a preacher at the times called Ananias. And in the middle of the road, he has this incredible experience and he transforms his life. And I think that's the part that I really want to focus on, regardless of everything else, because I think in many different ways, we are in that journey through life, also trying to do and accomplish things. And it is also possible that during our walk towards whatever it is that we are going, whatever goal we have set for ourselves, we may also encounter situations, things, experiences that lead us to really reconsider what is it that we're doing, and that sometimes can be very painful and very difficult in general at first, but can also be very clarifying. So I want to spend some time talking a little bit about that, and I think I can, if that's okay with you, I share a little bit about how the book came about, because I think that frames my perspective on that as well. And then I want to open it up to you, kind of just chime in and see what is it that you want to kind of talk about. And it is okay if you have not read the book, or if you don't want to read the book. It's also okay if you read it and you want to kind of dive into different parts. We're just going to keep it wide open to whatever experience you want to have today, right? Because in general, I don't know where you might be on that spectrum, but let me tell you this, and then you tell me if it's too much. Right around 2019, right? So right before COVID really became a thing, I find myself in a situation that I think may be common to many of us. I was working a lot, had a good career, relatively successful in the field that I was in and the stuff that I was doing. But there was something that wasn't necessarily fulfilling me, and I felt a little bit tired. I've been with the same organization for 12 years, which I love. I love the mission, but the work itself wasn't as fulfilling as it was before. And I was faced with this decision as we were going through another restructuring of how would I restructure the teams that I was responsible for, who would keep their jobs, who would not, how we would prepare ourselves for the future, and how we would navigate all these political and difficult things that were happening in public education at the time and still are. So I was in the middle of all this, and I just really felt like beaten down a little bit. And I knew that it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I struggled with this decision of, should I just try to do something different, or should I just keep doing what I'm doing, right? And because I was working very long hours, which is something I'm still, trying to improve on, I realized that I would have to make a change. That the best way for me to make a change was really to kind of jump into the unknown and figure it out. And it's sort of like what I did. And what I did at the time was I decided that I was going to write myself out of a job and restructure things and leave other people, with the responsibilities that I had. And instead of letting go of one additional person somewhere else, I let go of myself, and I just kind of walked away, which was a really hard decision for me, because I love the mission of reinventing public education, but I knew I was just beaten out. So I decided to take a little bit of a sabbatical of sorts and figure things out. And so I did that. I, much to my own surprise, I did that. I didn't think I was going to. I didn't think that was in me. And I started to kind of just take some time to really figure out what is it that I was going to do when I grew up, right? And I started to write. And parallel to that, here's a funny thing. Every once in a while we do talks like this and different things. And I had been doing this talk about our road to Damascus and about the symbolism behind Paul's incredible transformation from perhaps the greatest opponent to early Christianity to its greatest supporter. And whenever I had these talks, and I did this talk, sometimes people would come in and at different places, and they had said, have you ever written anything about this? I'd like to write, I'd like to read something about it. And, I thought it was really, really great. And I was really flattered by it. But after folks said that a couple of times, at different places and different meetings and different people that did not know each other, I'm like, maybe I should write a little bit about it. Maybe I should put something in paper. Maybe I have the time to do that now. So why don't I do that now? So I started to do that. I was actually in London at the time. So I pulled out my notepad in the middle of a cafe. And I think it was maybe like September, October of 2019. And I started just to kind of write. And I figured, you know what? this is going to be a great article. I'm going to write like 2 or 3 pages on this, and I can send it to people. People can tell me what they think. Maybe it will help someone. And I start writing, right? And I remember that day, like I think like 2 or 3 hours later, I had like 5 or 6 pages, and I was not even near like getting close to what I was going to do. So I'm like, maybe this will be like a 20-page article, right? So I kept on it. I kept at it. I kept on it. And by the time I got back from London, I was there to do a couple of talks and different things too. I had like 25 or 30 pages, and I realized that this was going to be more than an article. So I kind of embraced that. And I starting to revel in that as well, because the cool thing about it is that wherever I was going, this idea was following me, right? Kind of stuck with me. So I took a vacation with my family. We went to the Bahamas, and I found myself like, laying down on a beautiful beach, just thinking about Paul and his transformation. And I think that resonated with me because what I feel really happened, what really happened with Paul is that he had this journey that he was on, right? And he had his convictions of what he believed was right. And he was really courageous with it all and really figuring that stuff out. But then in the middle of the road, we can say that he was in a business meeting, or a business trip of sorts, right? When he's in the middle of trying to fulfill his job, this incredible light, this incredible presence approaches him and questions him. And at that moment, he puts aside all kind of rational thinking and explanations, and he opens his heart to just feel. And in that moment, he decides to do an incredible switch in his life. And he goes through a series of things, and we can talk briefly about this, but he starts to change his perspective on what is it that he needs to do. And I found a sense of connection there, right? Because the more I sat with him, the more I try to imagine what it would have been like to go through this journey from Jerusalem to Damascus that he was on, imagining like how he would have gotten his horse and how long it would have taken for him to get there, because it wasn't a quick journey like we do today, where we get in a car or get in a plane, right? Complain about Wi-Fi and the bad food and get there a couple of hours later. This was a couple of days journey. And what it would have felt like to be under the sun and all days, and what would it have felt like to have fallen off his horse and met that light, and then find himself blind in the middle of a desert, almost at Damascus, but not really. And also to kind of think about, what do the people around him do? Because he wasn't traveling by himself, right? You don't do these journeys of many days through the desert by yourself. When you're an important person, as Saul was, you have this entourage of people, and how do they react to your change of life and perception? So I think that as I was kind of grappling with that, I realized that all these things were as contemporary as they can be. Funny enough, and I say funny, as a figure of speech, interesting enough, because it was not funny at all, but the COVID pandemic kind of hit right a couple of months after I started to write the book. And I realized that in many different ways, we could also use this allegory to symbolize our communal symbolic journey through life, that maybe the world was also in a sort of journey to Damascus, where we were also heading a specific way, and then something happened that knocks us off our feet, and we are led to feel like confused, blind, not knowing what's happening. And we've got to make a decision whether we are going to go back to the way we were, symbolically speaking, whether we are going to go back to Jerusalem, like Saul had an option to, or whether we would be courageous enough to say, we don't know what's happening. We don't know where we're going. We can't really see well. We feel blind and confused, but we're going to continue to head on to this new path. So I began to realize there was more and more that we could really kind of peel from this whole journey of Paul's. And in that sense, I guess I just continue to kind of write, and things came out. So what I can't share with you at the highest level is that as I continued to write and came up with different pieces on the journey to Damascus, and I'm going to skip some slides here, it became obvious there were at least 7 different pieces that I thought were very fascinating, right? And I picked 7 because we could certainly have picked more than 7 symbolic awarenesses, but I figured I would share the 7 at a high level here with you so you can kind of see what I mean, and then we can kind of chat a little bit about that, and hopefully it will be interesting enough for you so that you don't fall asleep on a Saturday morning, right? At least if not, you can always go get coffee. Just remember that. You can always get coffee or tea for that matter. But anyways, I digress. So, all right. So if you have a couple of minutes, I want to talk to you a little bit about these 7 items for reflection. This is a picture of the actual road to Damascus as Paul might have undertaken it. So as you can see, it's a pretty solitary journey, it's a pretty reflective journey. There are no drive-throughs in parts of it. There are no Motel 6s where you get to, spend the night safely. You really have to kind of walk or ride your horse with camels and the whole piece to make sure you get there. And I imagine it would have been even harder back in the day to do that journey as well, right? And I think the story. I think it's always worth kind of reinforcing in a 2-minute version. If you really want to find this story of transformation, right, you've got to go to where it's written. And it's written in the book called Acts of the Apostles, which is one of the 27 books that are found on the New Testament, which are the second part of the Christian Bible. And in Acts of the Apostle, you're going to see a couple of sentences, 3 different times, talking about Paul's awareness. And this is also where I should make a pause and say that within traditional Christian circles, this is a story of conversion, right? Where Paul, who was a high-ranking Jew official at the time, decides he's going to be Christian. And that's certainly a way to read it. But I like to, as I said before, with the labels and everything else, I like to cast that aside because I think that is an oversimplification. At the end of the day, it's not about the story of conversion to a different faith, because the faith wasn't even congealed at that point in time. It is really, for me, a story about you grappling with purpose and meaning in your life, and you trying to figure out what is the right way to go, what's the right call to make, what are the right choices to take, and when you are struggling for purpose and meaning, like I said before, right? So I understand the oversimplification, and I'm not disagreeing to it. I think you can definitely say, yes, this is what's when Paul converted to Christianity. It just that Christianity wasn't even really a formal thing just yet. This is really a story of a person, of an important politician, so to say, at the time, of deciding whether he is going to change the way he is and the way he acts, given this new information that he has received. And that is a really difficult situation, because I think we are receiving new information every day, right, in our lives. And COVID has certainly injected a whole new sense of perspective and change in our lives. And we might be grappling with similar situations of just finding out what is it that we're going to do, right? And so as we think about this journey, he's going from Jerusalem, he's going to Damascus, and he's trying to find this person, Ananias, who is one of the early preachers of Christianity, who has been really efficient at sharing with folks a new way of thinking. And on top of that, there's a backstory, which I think is really interesting as well, that you can read in this wonderful book called Paul and Stephen, which is that Ananias, this preacher that he is pursuing, and he is tasked to bring down and bring back to Jerusalem by whichever means necessary, is also the person who has sort of converted his former love, Abigail, and who has actually passed away. So I think that he's also hurt at that point in time, and he also is looking for somebody to blame. That's my personal read. And so he goes to find Ananias, who is like 120 miles away. It's sort of like the distance between Jerusalem to Damascus as the crow flies. It's about 120 to 150 miles away. It's a big journey. It's the equivalent of going from I don't know if you're familiar, but it's equivalent from going to San Diego to Los Angeles, right? And he's doing it on a horse. And so he is in that journey, and he's thinking about this. His heart is heavy. He's lost his loved one who he had turned down because, long story short, you got to read the book. It's a wonderful book. The backstory is amazing because she was the sister of one of the early Christians who he persecuted, and he didn't want to be associated with any Christians because he thought that would be a betrayal of his own faith. And so he left the person that he loved and only realized that he really should go back to her later on. But when he did find her again and has the humility to go back and say, I was wrong, she's basically about to pass away. And she does. And then he is hurt once again after finding the joy. And I think that all factored into pursuing Ananias. I figured he would say, I'm going to go and inflict pain on this guy because he was one of the people who took something away from me. And so as he is in this journey, something that is unexpected happens. As he's almost at the end of his journey, an incredible light comes about as he is going on this convoy with 3 other people. And he feels dizzy, and he can't understand what's really going on. And he falls off his horse into the ground. And then he has this mystical experience where he recognized that it's Christ, right? This incredibly elevated spirit who has come to talk to him. And he feels at the moment all that, and he realizes that. And the first words that come out of his mouth are, what would you have me do? He realized it's about reevaluating. He in that, like, the split second, he understands that things have to change. And then Christ tells him that he needs to keep going to Damascus and wait. He doesn't give him all the answers. And when he comes back to his senses, Paul, or Saul at the time, is on the ground on the dusty road to Damascus, probably in somewhere like this, surrounded by his companions, his travel companions, who are wondering what's happened to this guy. Why is he like this? After all, he just fell off his heart. He is talking about things. And now, interesting enough, he's also saying that he can't see anymore. So he's got this vision, but now he's physically blind. And then they are really worried, right? Because he's his boss. He is their boss. And they're like, oh, we need to take him back to a hospital or to somebody. No hospitals, right? But we need to take him back to Jerusalem and make sure he's okay. What if he dies on our watch? What are people going to say? So I imagine all kinds of conversations that his colleagues and coworkers could have said and shared at that point in time. And they really want to take him back. And he says, no, I'm going to go forward. And like, no, you can't. You clearly are not yourself. Clearly there's too much sun. You just fell ill. You just fell prey to the sun. This is not good. Let's take you back. And he says, I'm not going back. And so eventually what they decide to do is 2 of them go back, and one of them helps him go to Damascus, which he does. Getting to Damascus, he reaches, and for all his contacts, remember, he's a famous person. He would have been an honor to host him because he was, a political figure. But all of his friends and colleagues turn him away after he starts talking about this whole Christ thing. They just don't want to get involved. And so he finds himself having to look for an inn, right? An inn, basically a hotel, which really didn't exist at the time. Because when you traveled, you stayed at other people's houses. And an inn for us may sound like something wonderful. But back in the day, an inn was really like a spare room in somebody's house on somebody's business, right? And so he's kept in this inn for a couple of days, blind, with no money left, just waiting because he was told to wait. And that must have been something incredible, to be blind, to depend on others when you were so powerful before, and to have no money and just sit there. And he also realizes that one companion he had started to get a little bit worried about associated with him, because now he's talking about the Christ to anybody he meets. And so he releases that one companion, and he's literally by himself. After a couple of days, guess who comes into his room? Ananias, the same person that he was persecuting, who, by the way, also had a vision from the Christ. And the Christ told him to go to that specific place, find Saul, and heal him. And I can only imagine what kind of conversation that was, right? Imagine conversation with Christ and Ananias. It's like, hey, so Christ, do you really want me to go to that place and help that guy that is literally arresting and killing all Christians? Are you sure? Are you sure this is the guy I want to go visit? But I think much to Ananias' credit, he also follows through Christ's request, and he goes there. He heals Paul by doing what we call passes or laying of hands, right? And then Paul begins to see, and from there begins a wonderful journey of reflection and changing his lives. And I think that the results of that are incredible, right? So if you go back to what we know of Paul today, you are going to see that oftentimes we call him the apostle of the Gentiles. That's because he went and spoke to everybody who was not a Jew, a Jew at the time. And really, the idea of modern Christianity that we know today, it's really about Paul, because his writings and his letters, which are about 13 letters out of the 27 books of the New Testament, so about half of the New Testament came through or are associated with Paul. We can talk a little bit about that, right? But the idea here being that what we know of Christianity really was because of Paul, because all the other writings that we've had of the Bible, they really were gone. And what we only had was the Greek writings that were found in different places in the first century. And the Greeks were obviously not Jew, so they were the ones who heard it, and they could only have heard it because of the work of Paul. But what is interesting here is that, Paul worked the entire world on foot, sharing this new message of hope, of life after life, of transformation. And he could only have done that if he was really, really, convinced that that was the right thing to do. So long story short, I figure I had to give you that context in case you didn't have it. But here's a guy that has this mystical encounter in the middle of that desert, as we talked about, right? In the middle of a place that is really arid and really transforms his lives. And so I think we take a couple of lessons from that I kind of expand a little bit in the book, and you're welcome to read it or not, or listen to it. And you're also very welcome to just kind of engage in conversation later if you like. But one of the first lessons that I think that I take away from the book that's applicable to all our lives is that we can be in a group but still feel alone. And I think these are things that we are going to have to struggle with or realign or make sense throughout our lives. Much the same way that Paul, or Saul at the time, was heading over to Damascus in a convoy, in a group of people, right? At the end of the day, when he had that experience, he was the only one that experienced the Christ in front of him. And all those who were with him did not see the Christ, even though they were a couple of feet away from him. So it's an important lesson, because transformation and growth really happens at an individual level. We have to kind of make terms with the idea that we are going to go through life in groups, right? We have our families, we have our friends, we have our spiritist group friends, and they're all very important. But at the end of the day, it's going to be our personal experience. And we are the ones that are going to have to heed the call for personal change. And that personal change doesn't happen with a group. It can happen while you are within a group, but it's down to you, right? You can sometimes feel alone in a crowd, and sometimes you can feel really great by yourself. So it's really about learning how to deal with these senses of feeling alone and feeling lonely, because in a way, like, feeling lonely can happen when you're a crowd, when you're surrounded with people. It's really a feeling. But being alone could also just be a physical thing, right? As in, I am alone in this room, but I don't feel lonely. So it's really about coming to terms with your perception of all of this and understanding that it is your call and that this is going to happen, right? You are going to feel alone, and you have to be prepared for that and be okay with that and know that it's normal. And that if you are feeling like that right now, that's also very okay. And I think the pandemic has brought that to us, where we have felt sometimes disconnected from people. And at the same time, we also learn how to connect people at an emotional level differently. We're connecting over Zoom, right, with your family who might be far away in ways that you hadn't before. So it's really about making sense of relationships and understanding where you are in life, right? And I go more into the details, and we can spend like a couple of hours talking about this, because sometimes we also have people who are with us in this earthly journey, and then all of a sudden they exit our group, right? We friends that we lose contact with, or perhaps our parents who pass away. Like, dealing with loss and with being yourself and being alone or lonely are important things that all of us must master on our way to happiness. We just have to deal and learn how to deal with that, right? So that's one of the things, one of the 7 lessons that we take away. I'm not going to spend too much time on them because I don't want to bore you to death either. And if you want to dive deeper, we can. But that's, I think, awareness number 1, that you can't be in this road with a group, but still you are out on the journey, on the personal journey that belongs to you. Nobody can do this journey for you. You are the architect of your own faith. You have to take that into your own, the reins into your own, of your life, into your own hands. And as we look into forward, I think another interesting perspective that comes to too, which I think is a really beautiful symbolic reminder to all of us, especially during COVID, is that sometimes we think that spiritual evolution or progress or personal growth is going to be this marvelous thing that, you know, we hear some angelic music in the background, the clouds break open, rays of light shine upon us, and we just feel enlightened. And, you know, the opposite might actually be true too, that sometimes there is this destabilizing meetings with life, right? It is sometimes falling off our own horse in life that have the greatest potential for change. So it's about recognizing that the challenges and pain and what we sometimes call suffering are also important agents of evolution. That these are also important moments that lead us to reconsider what we are doing, because oftentimes we would not have changed the way we were going were it not for these obstacles that come and say, you can no longer go this way, or what you want is not possible right now, or no, you can't do that. And sometimes we think that these are just barriers, but when we begin to look at the world through a spiritual lens and understand that we are immortal beings that are temporarily here in the flesh to learn different lessons and grow, we start to say that these obstacles, these perceived obstacles, are just really redirects, telling us to try to go into a different way. So let us recognize that these destabilizing meetings, that these challenges and obstacles, whether they are personal or whether they're collective, such as this pandemic, are important signs for us to reconsider how we can lead and live our lives in general. So that's a second lesson that I think is out there for us as well. And I'm going to keep flipping through these. I hope that's okay. And we can kind of dive deeper because I don't want to talk too much. I know I'm already talking quite a bit. But the third symbolic learning, I think, that we also take from Paul's journey to Damascus is his incredibly courageous question. When he is faced with that challenge and when he has this encounter with the Christ, he doesn't explain himself. He doesn't beg for forgiveness. He understands that he has done actions and made choices that perhaps were not the best in his past, but it doesn't behoove him to dwell on them. That at the end of the day, he's got to find a way of moving forward. And his courageous question is, Lord, what would you have me do? He recognizes that sometimes he does not have the answer, and he's humble enough to know that he needs guidance and help at times. And I think that is an important lesson in a world where we are taught from an early age that we must have all the answers, at least fake it till we make it. That we shouldn't, that admitting that you don't know something is a sign of weakness. And nothing could be farther from the truth, right? Knowing that you don't know something, it's actually a very important quality of very successful and happy people, because that means you can go ahead and get help from somewhere else. And so having this courageous question is really an important piece of our journey for us to ask ourselves whether we really want to change. And if we really do want to change something in our lives, whatever it may be, whether it's a job, a relationship, our habits, like we have to admit sometimes that we may not have the answer, but that we are going to grapple with it and make sense of it. And I think that's a very timely question for us too as a society, right? So what should we do here? Because I don't know that we have a clear answer for everything that's out there, but we can at least tackle it together, right? So we certainly could dive deeper into any of those, but I'm going to keep going. And then you tell me if you want to double click on anything later. And I think the fourth symbolism that we get from his journey, which is worth unpacking in many different ways, and we do that in the book, is that when we are going to change and transformation, whether we had that destabilizing fall from a horse or not, we are going to deal with some sort of temporary blindness. And in his case, it was a physical one, but it was also an emotional and spiritual one of sorts. Is when we don't know what is it that we need to do. When we begin to understand that what we thought was the world as we understood it no longer fits our own desires and preconceptions. When we understand that how we saw the world no longer suits us, and we feel blind because we don't know what's up or down, we don't know what to do, we don't know how to reconcile our own differences with ourselves. And this is not uncommon also to happen with folks who begin to study spirituality in general and begin to deconstruct that idea that only material success will bring us happiness. When we understand that that's not the case, no matter how much money we make or how beautiful we are, how famous we are, we start to struggle and say, what do I do now? Like, how do I make sense? Should I change my job, my life? Like, what do we do? So it's important to call this one out, I think, because the world is in this moment of blindness right now, where we're trying to let go of these old values, and we don't know where to go just yet. We don't have a clear answer. So it seems like confusion, seems like we're blind and lost. But if we find ourselves in this moment of blindness and confusion, that could actually be a sign that we are about to change, that we are seeking new ways. So we can't transform this confusion into something that's actually positive and say, now I know that there's a formula to this whole thing. Then I know that this blindness, although it might be unsettling, it's an important and necessary step into making sense of the world. Because sometimes we have to let go of the past to embrace the future. Sometimes, and this is awareness number 5, we have to make a decision to go ahead. And as much as we would like to only let go of what we had when we have something new to replace it with. Maybe we want a new job and we say, I'm going to leave my current job when I get a new job. But sometimes being in that old job won't give you enough time to search for a new one or really figure out what you want to do. And I can speak of that firsthand. Sometimes you need to kind of jump off that boat to make space for a new one. And in life, that's also true. Sometimes we need to leave behind a relationship that's no longer fulfilling us, the habit that we are struggling with, or even the places that we no longer want to be in. Sometimes we need to leave them behind before we can go somewhere else. Sometimes we have to make space in ourselves for something new. We can't just wait for it to happen and then let go of the past or anything else. That's a scary proposition, I know, but sometimes we just have to make space for the new, and that means letting go of the old. We got to do spring cleaning of sorts. So, and make the decision to go ahead. And this is one of the ways that Paul was really, really courageous. He had to make a decision that even though he was confused, on the ground, hurting, blind, he would not go back to his old ways. He would move forward. He would not decide to go back to Jerusalem, but instead he was going to walk to Damascus. And I think that's a beautiful symbolism in there for us too. When we are presented with these challenges, when the world is being presented with this challenge, are we going to go back to our Jerusalem? Are we going to go back to the way life was before? Are we going to make the courageous choice to move forward? We can, no judgment. We can go back to Jerusalem, right? We can't go back to the ways we were before. But was Jerusalem really fulfilling us? Was our old life pre-pandemic, for instance, really fulfilling and great for everybody? Sometimes we romanticize things and we feel, oh, it was so great before the pandemic. Sure, in many different ways, life was different, but it wasn't really a life that was working for everybody. We weren't all happy before the pandemic either, right? So is this the opportunity that we have to make this decision to go ahead and try to create something new? And I think you know what path Paul chose. And I think that makes sense for us to also have the courage to go ahead no matter what, right? And I'm almost at the end here. And I think the sixth lesson that I also want to talk about is the unexpected help. Because until now, we have been dealing with a lot of confusion, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, a lot of obstacles. But it's also important for us to kind of highlight that in Paul's journey to Damascus and through his blindness, there's always the unexpected help. And I mean that from the spiritual side of things. So as Paul was struggling with everything and was blind in that inn in a street called Straight in the road to Damascus, in a road in Damascus, Ananias showed up. And that very thing that he was pursuing was the one that actually helped him. Ananias came and healed him. And Ananias would only be able to come and heal him because the spiritual realm knew where Saul was at all times and sent help even before he knew he needed it. So Christ met with Ananias. Ananias had that vision, and Christ directed him to Paul at the same time that Paul was already making his way to the inn, right, in a couple of days. And so it's important for us to remind ourselves of that spiritual essence that we have. Yes, we are going through difficult moments in our life. Yes to all of that. And as spiritual beings, we are not alone. We have help from above who are, familial spirits, our mentors and guides, a whole plethora, a whole gang of spiritual helpers who are caring for us and sending us great messages and great help when we need it, so that we can fulfill the things that we need to take care of. So we can meet those goals, the criteria that we set for ourselves before we came to this life, right? So that is the unexpected help, something for us to celebrate and not forget. And one additional thing that's also important for us to consider, and that's the last piece here that I talk about, is it's also important to acknowledge that there is a different Damascus out there for us. I say that because I think you will agree with me that the Damascus that Paul arrived at was fundamentally different than the Damascus that he thought he was going to arrive at. Now, mind you, physically, it was the same Damascus. It was the same city, the same place. But in his mind, what he expected was going to happen when he got there was very different than what he actually happened, right? So I think in many different ways, this is also a gentle reminder for us to ask ourselves, what is our Damascus? What is it that we want to arrive at? And how did we come about that idea of that being the place that we wanted to arrive at? And it's okay for us to change the idea of our Damascus along the road. It is okay for us to go halfway through the journey and decide that our goals in life are different than the ones that we set for ourselves 20, 30, 10, 5 years ago. It's okay to change the goalposts. It's okay for us to evolve our needs and desires, and by consequence, our objectives. And so I ask ourselves sometimes, what is our Damascus? Are we reevaluating where we want to go and why? And I think these are important conversations that we ought to have. And it's very okay for us to reevaluate, but we have to make time for all of that, right? And so as we look at this path, at this whole journey that we go through, to make a long story short, I think that there's beautiful symbolism in Paul's journey to Damascus and how it can stand as an allegory, as an extended symbolism for our lives. And we can unpack many of these different items in many different ways to really craft what we think our life should be like, what we think our happiness could come from. And I say that because at the end here, I reserve this slide here for us because I think is a really beautiful one from a spiritual perspective. This is a report that comes from the Gospel of John, one of the 4 Gospels that we have in the New Testament. And in chapter 11, we see these words supposedly spoken by Jesus, which are beautiful. And he says, I am the resurrection and the life. And whoever believes in me, even though they die, will live. And whoever lives by believing in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And I think in many different ways, it could be the summation of a journey, because what I hear the Christ saying here is that these teachings and this understanding that life after life is a fact is the resurrection and the life. You see, sometimes we hear these words from the Christ, and if we think as a human being, we think that he's pretty cocky. Who is he to say I'm resurrection and life? But if you imagine that this is a highly evolved spirit that has no ego, he's saying that this message of existence of life after life, of spirituality, of the immortal spirit is the resurrection and the life. And whoever accepts that reality already, whoever embraces this fact that we are immortal spirits who are going to transcend our physical body, right? Even though you will die physically, you will live forever because you already understand and accept that reality that is truly your own. And whoever lives by believing in this, right? If you lead your life this way and you really pay attention to the immortal self in you and not just the physical one, you will never die because there is no death. There is only physical transformation, right? Your body might go, but who you are is not. And there's an incredible call to action that I think Christ was really famous for as a great teacher, which, by the way, is the only title he ever took on. He says, do you believe this? Which really means, hey, this is your personal choice. It's important for you to come upon your own conclusions. It is important for you to make sense of all these things by yourself.
But
it's not whether
there's nobody yet.
If there is no denomination, there's no denomination or rules by a specific group that is going to go ahead and really make a difference in your life. It's about your personal choice, right? So as you think about all of this, there is a great opportunity for us to kind of reflect here a little bit and really consider whether we are also in a journey like that of Paul of Tarsus, if we are also going through these incredible steps along the way, and whether it makes sense for us to keep this framework that Paul offered us 2,000 years ago to kind of guide ourselves and know that we're not alone, that it is only understandable and normal that we may feel sometimes alone or lonely, even though we're surrounded by people. And that sometimes life will throw at us destabilizing meetings. It will throw at us circumstances in which are going to shake the way we do things or even hurt, to call our attention to the fact that we maybe need to do something different. And that we are going to be faced with a need for a courageous question. We are going to have to come to terms with ourselves, whether we are going to admit to ourselves that we might not know exactly the way forward, but that we do need to change. And in all of this, we're going to have to struggle with this blindness, emotional or spiritual in a sense, where we may be confused and lose all the certainty that we had before of how the world worked. And that's okay, because that would mean that we are creating a reevaluation point, that we are entertaining new ways of going about life. And that's what it takes to change. And we're going to have to make the decision. Do we really do this? Are we really going to embrace what's ahead of us? Or are we going to continue to do things the way we do? Are we going to go back to Jerusalem, to our old self? Or are we going to give ourselves permission to go into the unknown, to Damascus, which is ahead of us? And through it all, we have to also understand that we are going to get help along the way, that the spiritual world is going to continuously help us make the choices that we need to make, have the opportunities that we need to kind of arrive where we need to. Because at the end of the day, we are not physical beings only. We are primordially and first of all, immortal spirits. And so that all leads us to this constant evaluation and thinking of what is it that we want to do or accomplish? What is our purpose and meaning? What is our Damascus? And so in many different ways, I feel like I'm personally in that journey. And I think that many of us may feel like that too. But here's one beautiful piece of support that we can also have. Paul was first Saul. So before, he was this incredible figure that has played an incredible role in the history of the Western world and beyond. He was also a person making not so great choices. And if he was able to do this incredible transformation, why wouldn't we too? Why wouldn't we be able to make smaller transformations in our lives? So I feel grateful for that example that stands the test of time that was offered us 2,000 years ago, and the opportunity for us to kind of continue to talk about what is important in our lives and how do we step into the sense of reality and understanding that we are immortal beings that are here temporarily and that are going to transcend this physical journey. And so how do we make the best choices in that journey to reflect our goals, which should be mainly spiritual in nature, right? We should focus on things that are permanent, not impermanent like the physical body. So that's my take on our road to Damascus. That's a little bit of the inside of how the book came about. I will be honored if you feel like you would like to read it, and if you do, but you can't right now because you're busy, there's an audiobook, and if you can't afford it, let me know. I have promotional copies I can give to folks who might be going through a challenging time right now. And of course, I would also invite you to, I was going to say, if you want to keep the conversation going, you can find me on social media at Dan Assisi, whatever social media you use. I'm very creative. I always use the same name, so easy to find me, but thrilled to have the opportunity to chat with you and love to hear your perspective and see if you have anything to add. And Anna, I'll turn that back over to you if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Dan. I felt myself reflecting so much about what you said, and I'm sure that people here have a lot of comments as well in terms of their own journey. I would say that the time of this book could not be better. Thinking that right now we are all facing somehow this evaluation of, what do we want in a way or another. And I'm thinking maybe for some people is, what do we want in terms of my professional life? What do I want in terms of my spiritual priorities? What do I want in terms of my marriage? And suddenly we are living in times, as Givaldo kind of guessed that years ago, where depression and mental health is probably the biggest topic that we read and see, the largest difficulty or challenge that everyone is going through, much more than cancer or AIDS or COVID. I mean, people may or may not have COVID, but many of us having to face their own internal challenges, mental challenges, and looking for support from different ways through, drugs or psychotherapists, or even kind of going, south. So I'm really grateful that you kind of created this roadmap in a simplified way for us, kind of showing, okay, so maybe all these encounters were with Jesus that we face through good and bad moments, they are not by accident. There's a reason why we go through that. The loneliness that we feel, maybe it's a time to stop and think. And I want you to share with us. I mean, you make really a big step when you walk away from your role as coordinating the schools in California to kind of pursuing a coaching career and writing a book. I know that you have a very busy life. Just you can fill up your schedule just by giving lectures, but these are all free. So that's not what pays the power bills for you. This is you as a disciple of Paul, basically talking to all the people out there and sharing the.
Yeah, and that's a really real thing, right? That I think that's so beautiful about this. I think I should say that Paul really gives us this framework, right? So I think what I'm really doing here is just trying to look at it in a simplified way in many different ways, because his story in many different ways, I feel like it's universal. And I think when we move away from that idea that it's a conversion story, and we think about it as a human being, he had these very important deals, challenges to kind of face with, right? As he left his role before, he was also leaving behind his salary and his living, right? He make a choice to quit his job without knowing what it would look like. And many times that seems irresponsible to us. And I get that. And it could be, right? But sometimes when something speaks so deeply within you that you have to do it, it's also important to listen to your heart. So I'm not saying that everybody should quit their jobs today, right? That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying like, you've got to listen to your heart, right? And that was honestly one of my concerns too, was, so should I leave my job? I mean, I don't have another one lined up. I mean, I'll be okay for a while, right? But eventually, what do I do, right? And do I have to figure it out? And I was really fortunate to have support from my wife and talk to her. And she says, like, I was never about money. So you do you, right? And that was incredibly powerful for me to have that support systems to say, right, like, well, we'll just change our lives, right? We'll be okay. We'll figure it out. And I think that these are really important pieces in our lives. And I think that's what I think there's the wisdom of the gospel and of the Paul. These are very contemporary issues when we think about it, right? He decided whether he was going to leave his job because he needed to do something else. I made a lot smaller decisions, right? Fortunately enough, I opened a consulting company later on, and I'm okay. Like, I can figure this stuff out actually, and I've got more freedom than before, which is wonderful. So I can pay my power bills, right? So these are important things. We should be thoughtful about how do we sustain ourselves and kids and family and all these things. But I think the higher calling here is for us to listen to our hearts and also understand that there are trade-offs, right? If I had waited to build this different thing before I quit my job, it would never have happened because I would not have had the time to invest in building this consulting firm or this executive coaching piece, right? Because I was working somewhere else. So I had to let go of something, and that was really hard for me. And I think of a lot of us, sometimes stepping into the void is hard, right? Letting go of something before you catch something new is really hard. But sometimes it's the only way, right? And so I am not saying, again, I want to be very careful, but my words here, very clear too. I'm not saying go out there and quit everything. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying listen to your heart and take the example of Paul, who has undergone this incredible transition, perhaps one of the greatest personal transformations that we have noticed or known in history, along with Mary of Magdalene, which we don't talk about. I think her transformation might have even been bigger than that. But this was a really well documented, and a part of it of writing about Paul was in my own piece about who has done this, who can show us the way, right? And I think that we can follow in his footsteps because I think he left really bright ones that we can see even in the dark. And I think that's ultimately his gift to us. My view is he's left us this framework, this road that we can kind of think of. And when we are in the process, sometimes we feel lost and alone, and we feel like we are the only ones in the world that are going through this, right? But the truth is we're all going through this in one way or another. We're all feeling lonely. We're all feeling disconnected. We're all feeling in different parts. We're feeling like we lost people, right? But the good news is if you remember this, if you take the time to kind of remember these steps, you know this is part of a journey. So you can say, it's really confusing right now. Oh, but this is actually, when I zoom out, it's a good thing because I am reinventing my perception of the world. This has happened to Paul, and I know what happened to him if he persisted. I too am going to persist, right? So I think that ultimately is the gift that it's left to us. And I think that's, not to kind of go off on a tangent here, but me, I love to going off on tangents. But at the end of the day, I think that's what the gospel is this incredible stories about personal change. And I think that the New Testament, the Bible, is a book of change. It's all about change. It's all about growth. It's all about becoming better people, not because we feel we must, but also because it makes us happy. I think those two things are connected, right? And so I am really led to reflect on all this because now with COVID, we have this really different and difficult moment to kind of navigate together too, right? we are anxious about our mortality. We cared about dying because we forgot about our immortal self. I think that's the hidden secret of COVID, right? Everybody's afraid of dying, but nobody's talking about it. And also, we are afraid of figuring out what to do next. Like, we're arguing about what does this world look like? Should I stop wearing masks? Should I wear masks? Is it safe to go out again? Do we go back to the way we had before? Do we help people? Do we give them incentives or tax breaks or not? We are struggling with this whole thing. And I think many of us are saying, oh, I'm so glad. Let's just go back to doing what we had before. Let's just go back to Jerusalem. That's okay. But maybe that's not what all of us want to do. Right. And if that's like, what is it that you want to do? What's your Damascus? What is it that you want for your life? And what are you going to do about it?
Wow. Wow, you said so much that I'm still digesting what you just said. I'm thinking even this fear of death, that in the past we would always think that the oldest people would be the ones going first. And suddenly with COVID, it kind of throws us a curveball, and anyone can be gone at any time, right? So
yeah. But that was true before too, right?
Well, but it wasn't on our face this way, because
Yes,
there was not
yes.
the media basically counting and kind of you having apps and Google information about that in terms of how many people of this age, this age,
Yeah.
kind of that on your face. So and I think that we unfortunately do kind of go back to that point of being managed by fear. We hate that, but that's very efficient, and that's unfortunately the way that we see things happening many times. But this is something that we all thinking, okay, am I in the next one? So I see that Leticia has a question. So
first of all, thank you, Dan. Amazing, beautiful life journey, beautiful story. And I mean, I read the book Paulo Estevam when I was kind of a teenager, and it's one of the books of my life, and I love the way that you translate the steps and help us being practical about the 7 steps, and thank you so much. I think humanity thanks you. I think that I myself, I'm in my journey, and I think a lot of us here also, and how did you find your Damascus, right? Kind of, what would be kind of the tips? Because sometimes we are driven by a lot of the mental, kind of the mind, the rational. When do we know that I know that it can change, but that we are heading to the right Damascus, kind of, what were your experience with that, in that journey, in terms of more, the steps are there. It's amazing the way that you structure them and translate them in a more simplified way, but in the more spiritual way or untangible way. What could you share with us? I mean, am I in the right path?
Yeah. I think that we all have those questions, right? I think that's only normal. And so I want to first acknowledge that, right? And I think in many different ways, I know at least I did and still do, we think that there's one thing that we need to do, right? That there's one magical thing. And I ask myself, what if the purpose of our lives is really not to do that one thing, but to find out what the purpose of our life is? You know what I mean? I wonder if a lot of what we're here to do is to really get to know ourselves and find out what is it that makes us happy. In my particular case, I know that I have always enjoyed talking about spirituality and so forth, but I also know that that if I were to do that 100% of my time, 2 things would happen. One, I could not pay the bills. And I think that I have a problem with that. My wife probably pay the bills, right? But I think that I'm still so attached to to things that I want to have and do that I haven't fully let go of that. So I can't say that I arrive at my Damascus just yet, but I'm on my way to do that, right? Because I can't do that just yet. I'm working on it. And I think the second thing is, I think it's important to do two things. I think it's important to have a job and also have your joy, right? And I think one of the things that I did, even actually working with a coach too, was to break this idea that all my satisfaction and purpose of life had to come from one place, right? And I think this is something that I created for myself. Nobody ever told me, but I assumed that my joy would come from either work, right, or whatever it is. And actually, it's okay for you to have the joy come from different places. It could come from your family. It could come from the work you do. It could come from the avocation that you have. There's vocation and avocation, right? Vocation could be your job, and avocation could be that what you do for pleasure. And they do not need to be the same thing. And when I realized that, I'm like, that's a big shift for me. So I think when you're really thinking about your Damascus, it's good for you to make time to stop and reflect on what is it that makes you happy, truly happy. Because you can say, yes, a new car makes me happy, but only for a little bit. A new house makes me happy, but only for a little bit, right? The Buddha did an incredible treatise on psychology, right? Before, when he says that all suffering comes from attachment to impermanent things. Like we suffer because we put our happiness in things that are going to go away. Our car is going to go away. Our partner is going to go away. Our work's going to go away. So, and then I think Jesus came and complemented that, right? I did the 2.0 version, which was better, was, put your treasures in heaven where moth does not corrupt and thieves cannot steal it, which put your happiness in things that are going to be permanent. So what are the things that are going to be permanent in my view? The relationships, the feeling of accomplishment, the learning that you're going to do. When you prioritize those, as opposed to material things, you will be less frustrated. You will suffer less, right? And so for me, that was a big guideline on how to think about what is it that I want to do. And to be honest with you, I'm still struggling with that, right? I just want to be clearly transparent there for you. So I left that situation at work to make time and do this other stuff. And then all of a sudden I start building this consultancy that's took off. And now I find myself so busy that I don't have the time that I wanted for the things that I said I was going to do. And so I am having a conversation with myself and say, here I am again, on the road again, going back to my old habits. I've cleared that. I made that past choice, but our habits come back to us. So it's also okay for us to understand that we can use this framework in many different times of our lives for different things. And so now I'm having a conversation with myself and saying, after I'm done with this project I'm working with until March 27 and 29, I am going to dial down on the client so I can go back to do the things that I enjoy. For instance, I started writing a second book, which is very different than the first one. And I had to stop because now I don't have time. And so isn't it funny that sometimes the old self creeps back in if you don't pay attention, right? So it's important for us to remind ourselves of that and give ourselves the grace to say, I'm a work in progress. I'm going to figure it out. And do I know what my ultimate happiness is? Not always. There's moments of lucidity, right? There's moments when you do know, when you're closer to the spirit, and then sometimes life pulls you back and you forget all the stuff, right? And so how do you keep yourselves in those moments of lucidity? And I found that for me, some time to reflect and think about myself as an immortal spirit helps me reframe things, right? Helps me reset the way I look at things. And that's why I like Spiritism so much, because it gives me these answers and explains to me how the spiritual world works. And in thinking about that and in reading about that and studying that, I am reminded that my journey here is temporary, that what you're looking at right now is a temporary version of me, right? And sometimes I joke and I say, sometimes I feel like we spend more time in our lives brushing our teeth than thinking about ourselves as immortal spirits, because brushing our teeth, all of us do at least twice a day for 2 minutes apiece. But I don't know that I always spend 4 or 5 minutes a day kind of stepping into my immortal self, right? So I've noticed that I am more effective in fulfilling my goals when I make time for myself. For me, particular works in the morning. When I do it, I don't do it every day. I should, but sometimes I just feel like the work, right? And I take 10 minutes to kind of think about things and remind myself, this is another day. The job that I'm doing right now, it's not the most important thing ever, right? And at the end of the day, I'm going to survive this day just like any other, whether it's a pressure-filled day or not. And I need to find moments of joy. And so I think that's kind of like what I take. I can't tell you that I'm the happiest person in the world, and I can't tell you that I'm the person that you should look to. But I think that Paul was much happier, much more fulfilled. I think we can look at him or to him. And obviously we can look to Jesus too, but sometimes it's harder to comprehend because he's so ahead of us, right? But anyways, that's kind of like the take I take, right?
I kept thinking about the 2 minutes twice a day reflection, and I think Leticia as well. And then what you said, that Paul was probably happier than you or most of us. And I'm thinking Paul being really spanked and imprisoned and starved, and I mean having to run away in the middle of the night, and he had this fulfillment inside of him that we could see through his letters, right? That he was in the right place, that he found his purpose, which many of us have not found.
I think these lenses of immortality, it's the path to find, right? Because I mean, sometimes we think our purpose, and I'm struggling a lot with that in this life, in the way that I live today, right? If we put the lenses of immortality, there's a good insight for us to reflect on what is my purpose being an immortal being, right?
And yes, I asked yes to all of this, right? Clearly I'm biased, but like to be able to do all that Paul did, right? To the world many times on foot, right? And go through all the stuff. The only explanation I can find is he did that because he liked it. He enjoyed it, even because of the hardship. It was incredible because nobody does that to martyr themselves. Nobody can do that for that long to punish themselves, right? So clearly he found a sense of joy and purpose and meaning that he really was courageous enough to hold on to, because he couldn't up at any point in time, right? He could have gone back to the comfort of his old life because he had a good life, but he chose not to because that spoke higher to him. He was aligned to what his purpose and meaning, and he held on to it. And I think a lot of it really was this idea of understanding that he was an immortal spirit. And we don't see that through traditional Christianity, but when we look at, Paul and Stephen, when we understand what early Christianity was about and their knowledge of mediumship and how Christ spoke to the disciples, we understand that once you embrace that path, it becomes easier. The pain doesn't go away, right? He still suffered, right? And I like to make a distinction sometimes between pain and suffering. Like, listen, we're all going to face pain. It's part of life, right? It happens. The body is going to hurt. Like emotionally, you're going to hurt. But the amount of suffering we prescribe to that pain depends on our mental attitude. We're going to feel it. I'm not saying we're never going to feel pain. But like you can dwell on it. Like men codes are a perfect example, right? Like men codes, like, guys sometimes get this cold and they have a cough and it's the end of the world, while like their wives are like plowing through stuff with a lot more, right? So men codes are a typical example of like suffering that is unnecessary, right? But you get my drift. So I think that's part of it that we kind of have to figure it out. I'm not saying let's all toughen up and not feel pain. It's important to talk about it. And I think another one that, it's so much to unpack. I think that that's why, let's not talk about the book because it's so much to unpack. I don't think we could, but mental health is another deal, right? When Paul was like on the ground, blind, telling folks he had a meeting with Christ, they thought he went crazy, right? Then he goes into Damascus and he talks to his friends and say, I've changed my perspective. I'm going to do this now. I'm going to follow the Christ. And they're like, are you nuts? Like, you can't stay in my house. What are people going to think of me if they think that I'm with you, right? So these are important things that lead us to question this idea of what sanity looks like and how much time we need to, because if you decide to do something different today, those people around you who only see you the way you've always been are naturally, out of care for you, going to say, what's happening? This is not you, right? And that's another thing about being in a group, right? But you have to be alone in the sense of like, you've got to make your decisions whether you're going to stay the way other people think you are or should be, or whether you're going to step into what you think is important, right? I personally still face that many times. Like I tell people when I meet them, and I still have this doubt sometimes, I say, I do strategic planning, I do executive coaching, and sometimes I feel like, I shouldn't say like, and I also write and talk about spirituality because I feel I'm going to be judged about that in the realms that I have gravitated, right? Where spirituality and religion generally are not accepted, right? And so these are constant things that we kind of have to learn to deprogram from ourselves and see what is it that we are going to embrace. And honestly, I find that hard. For me, it's very hard. But guess what? Like, what gives me the most joy? Right? And so I got to go back to that. And again, I go back in the circle, and I certainly biased. I'm going to call my bias out. But this idea of understanding myself as a spiritual being has helped me tremendously during the pandemic, because I know that even if I lose my life or those who are around me lose their lives, I'm still going to be in touch with them, because I see that on a weekly basis when I walk into a mediumship meeting. So I've done this enough times where I know for a fact, will it not hurt? Yes, it will hurt. But will it be the end of the world? No. Right? And so that sense of certainty about my spiritual self has greatly helped me not be completely anxious and overridden by anxiety during the pandemic. Right? And so I'm not saying people should do that. I'm saying like how grateful I am to have the opportunity to see myself at that. I don't see that all the time, but how it has actually helped me during these difficult times. Because, remember, when we start thinking, I'm going to get off my soapbox, I promise. Give me 30 more seconds. When we remember that we are immortal spirits, and we know there is such a thing as reincarnation, we have to remember that the people who left us this life that we loved, they did not stop loving us because they died. And we don't stop loving them because they died. So they're on the other side. We're loving them. They're loving us. And that should be reassuring, right? Because they haven't stopped being. Here's the kicker. If we think about it, we have had many lives before. We just don't remember them for good reasons. And in those lifetimes, you have had mothers, fathers, cousins, friends, partners, co-workers, what have you, that have loved you and haven't stopped loved you. Just because you don't remember them doesn't mean they have stopped loving you. They could be at this very moment sending you the best vibrations of love that they have that you're just not aware because you don't remember. But the more you think about it, the more you look back, you must have, hundreds of lives before. So there is an immense group of people that you may not recall, but that you have met in all those lifetimes that continue to love you to this date. And that is incredibly beautiful and powerful when you stepped into that truth and you open yourself up and say, holy shit, the amount of love out there for me in the world is incredible. I just forgot about it. And it gives me almost like tears to my eyes, right? And so it's an important thing for us to kind of remember. And I think this is the consequences of that immortal spirit thinking that we were talking about. It's not just, oh yeah, I'm an immortal spirit, but what does that mean? You have lived other lives, you have made other relationships. Sure, you didn't get all of them right, but you got many of them right. And all this love that's out there for you is there for the taking. You just have to kind of sit with it a little bit and say, and open your chest up and remember that you are an immortal spirit. And guess what? The beautiful piece, it just doesn't stop there. And this is when I stop talking. You're going to have many more lives before too, from here on too. So that circle of love will only continue to grow. And that's what we begin to realize It's a tiny little bit of what it means to be in love, like in spiritual evolution, and have this spiritual family that we talked about. Imagine being in a place, in a world where everybody that you know loves you at that level. How incredible this planet's going to be generations from now, right? And how wonderful it is that we are here now, being part of this change, having access to this kind of information that the world goes on, so that we can live and lead through example and be part of that change. Because we are also born here for a reason. We are born in these difficult times because we can make a difference. So we are called to this road of Damascus, right? In this particular point in time, we have something to offer. And that could be daunting at times, but we're not saying we need to change the world, right? We're not going to stop the war in Ukraine by ourselves, right? We're not going to do that, all the stuff, but through our actions, we can help. And so I think it's a beautiful thing. It just really is. Like, if we remember that, if we go through our days with that in our hearts, our lives are easier.
Yeah. Then Tabitha has a question.
Oh, sorry, I had before and my kids arrived, so it wasn't. Then just thank you so much for everything. It was so great to know you better and to get your journey testimonial and to know more about the book. I'm so interested. I already downloaded in my Apple, so I'm very interested to read. And I just want to say that is I agree with, like, the fundamental piece is like to find joys in many ways. And I struggle with that too. Like, I work for charter schools too when you work there. So I was like, okay, I would change for charter school. Maybe I'm already doing something that will fulfill my life, but it's not exactly. So like, we need to find other ways in life to get this to us, right? And doesn't need to be huge, or we don't need to be like, oh my gosh, now I find my path and that is going to be that's it. No, I think all the time we are learning more, we are experiencing different things. And this day I met a person that is now working with us in the charter school world, and he went to Africa for like 10 years to build schools for kids. And I was like, oh my gosh, and I'm just here donating clothes. So like, oh my God, I need to do better in life, right? But it's good to find those people in your life, because we know that they are a star for sure, but we need to really push ourselves, right, to do better, to make change in your life and to improve, and we are here for that. So I think your Road to Damascus book will bring more joy to me and open even more my eyes. So I really appreciate. I just want to say that.
Oh, that is so kind of you. Nothing would make me happier. I can tell you that, right? And so, yeah, let me know what you think. And I think that it's a great thing that you say too, which is also important for us to hold on to, is there are going to be great people doing incredible things out there. And maybe we don't measure up to them right now, right? But you have to remember, right? And this is something I say in the book too. Like, you can read this book in many different ways. If you want to know why I'm talking about Paul, read the beginning. If you don't care about that, just jump straight into the lessons, right? Like, find your own journey. But my point here is, before Paul was Paul, he was Saul. Today we look at him and we see him as Paul. We have St. Paul's Cathedral. We have the city of São Paulo in Brazil. There's all these things that are named after this incredible person, right? From where we sit here today. But he wasn't always like this, and he did not start like this. So you are going to be great like that too eventually. It might not be in this lifetime, but we start ahead of him, right? Because fortunately, I want to believe that nobody here has had other people murdered or arrested. And he did. And he did, as he was Saul. You know what I'm saying? Like, and if it did, no judgment on my part, just a little bit, because I'm human. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's important for us to kind of not lose perspective, because sometimes we put these people on a pedestal for the things they've done, deservedly so, that we almost make them feel like they're not human, or that they're cut from a different cloth, right? And I think we've done that with Jesus. It's a different piece, right? But like, you know what I'm saying? Like, we think like Paul never made a mistake, or he started like being like this. Nothing can be farther from the truth. And that's why I think his life is so interesting. because it really shows to us how somebody can literally do a 180. And I don't think that we are called to do that 180 like he did. It could be that we are. I don't know. I don't know your story, right? You know your story better than anybody else. But do you know what I'm saying? Like, if he has done such a tremendous change like that, we certainly can do the changes that we want to do in our lives. And I think it's important to us not to feel the pressure to change, but tap into the joy of what it would be like to change, because that's how you sustain change, in my opinion. You don't, like, I think our society has been moved by fear, and I was talking about this earlier today, and that's good for the short term, but it can't sustain you for the long term. And we've got to break away with a mold that I think in many different ways organized religion has given us through history, right? If you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. That's not a good way anymore to go about things. Tap into your joy and find what is it that you do, right? Because I guarantee you, if you look in your life, there are going to be moments of joy when you are helping others, when you are learning and growing, that really stick with you. And they might be more powerful than the car you bought, right, 2 years ago, or whatever it was, right? So I think it's a great reminder of, like, why is it that Paul did this? Why is it that Christ did what he did? Because they tapped into what made them happy. And it's okay if we're not there yet. But you know what? We're on our road, and that's what we do, right?
You were talking about kind of the happiness that material things usually give us. So there is a documentary on Netflix. I think that the name is Happy, and they make like a big analysis, and they interview people all over the world, basically saying what makes people happy. So it's very interesting for those who have not watched it. I definitely suggest you to kind of have a movie night. It's very inspiring, because you see people really living a pretty awful life in a material standpoint, but being very fulfilled and happy because they had the other things that we know, like they are helping others, they have families. I mean, they love someone, and they are loved. And they basically made a research and an analysis, and they found out that if you buy the car of your dreams, it's going to make you happy for 15 days. 15 days. That's it. After 15 days, it's part of your routine. So even if you buy the Ferrari of your dreams. And the other thing that I thought that was very interesting is that we keep saying that money doesn't bring happiness, and they say it actually does. There is a cut of $50,000. And that means that with $50,000, that person, and they came up with that number thinking that you have the basis. So kind of the pyramid, it's a Maslow pyramid. Kind of you have your house, you're able to dress and eat and have a comfortable life with dignity, because this is very important. But after that you reach that baseline, it may be not 50, 60, I don't know. In the movie, they mentioned 50. It doesn't make a lot of difference. So what they try to say is that, okay, I need a bigger house. My house of, 3 bedrooms is not enough. I need 4. Well, that may give you some satisfaction for a few weeks, and that's it. Because that's not going to change like how you feel inside. So any other person would like to ask anything to Dan?
I just want to say thank you, Dan. It was a very inspiring and amazing morning. It is my birthday today, so I take it as a gift. Thank you very much. I'm inspired by your conversation today with us, and I'm definitely reading your book after finishing the book that I'm reading. So thank you very much. It was a very inspiring, and I can really relate to what you said. In my professional career, I've been through moments where I'm thinking about what I should be doing, and what is my purpose, and what is the value that I can bring to this world. and I really resonate to what you said, and thinking on a very pragmatical way. There are things that we can do, and yeah, I'm definitely going through this journey right now. So very, very contemporary, and the story, Paulo and Saulo, he was an amazing example for all of us. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
And one
Happy
of
birthday,
the
Luis. Happy birthday, sir. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So Luis just made a big change on his professional life right now. So he probably went through that kind of a thought of, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I know that he was cooking that idea for a while until he jumped.
Yeah, it's scary, but I wish you all the best. And I know that it will be for all the best for whatever reason, right? And it's really hard. And keep going. Keep, find your joy. And it sometimes takes reworking what we think and our expectations are and what we want for life. But that's okay, because that's all we are doing. We're always trying to re-examine. So congrats on your birthday. And thank you for sharing that with us today. It's wonderful that you're here. We are the ones who are receiving the gift of your presence today. So thank you so very much, and congratulations, and keep going.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Well, so I think we're gonna wrap up for today. Dan, thank you so much. You know that you always have a free invitation. You have such a busy agenda, and I'm very grateful that you always find time for us. Always, always. There's not a single time that I ask for anything from you that I heard a no. I don't know if you have no in your vocabulary.
Oh, I do.
I have not experienced that ever with you. So
we must have no's. We must have no's in our vocabulary. But thank you.
But so we are very thankful. I think that for us and a lot of people in this group is basically doing the advanced course of the systematic study of the spirit team. So we finished the SSS, and now we are doing kind of the next advanced studies of the New Testament. That is the FAB class. So we're following that. So we just finished looking at the post letters, and so it's very refreshing for all of us who did that research on the New Testament and the evaluation, very timely. And that was part of my decision to ask you to talk about your book. So we are very grateful to have you here. And at this moment, I, on the deepest of my heart, I ask for all the superior beings that bring you a big arrangement of beautiful flowers, roses of all colors, with perfume that can fill all your home, as a symbol of our gratitude and of our love. May all your words sink into ourselves. We know that we are not alone, that we have the incarnated audience, but the spirits that surround us is probably like the triple of the number. And we are all in this journey of finding ourselves, putting ourselves in the same path that we should have been since the beginning. What I wish for you then is that your words really cross the line of time. You know that books have that power, and they continue to enlighten others like they enlightened me. May you always be this bulb of light that always bring joy to everyone around you. We're very thankful for this morning. We ask all the mentors of the Spirit Center here in Portland to bless our homes, bless everyone's, wherever they are. May each one of us have a peaceful week fulfilled with love and joy. At this moment of gratitude, we also want to pray for those in Ukraine. May all this love be shared with them. May all this love be shared with the Russians leaders. May we encounter this planet as a loving planet, a home for everyone that is just, that gives hope. May all remember that we are sons and daughters of the same God. And with this we say amen.